All right, today we are diving into one of the most chaotic periods you can find in modern history, early 20th century China. It's an incredible story of a fallen empire, brutal power struggles, and it really shows how a nation, when it's consumed by its own problems, can become dangerously vulnerable to outside threats.
And that really gets us to the heart of the question for today. How does a country's internal fighting basically roll out the red carpet for an invasion? We're going to see exactly how China's turmoil created what was, for an ambitious neighbor, a golden opportunity.
So to really get how this all happened, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the very beginning, to the moment when a political system that had ruled China for thousands of years just collapsed.
The year is 1911. The Qing dynasty, China's very last imperial dynasty, falls. Now, this wasn't just a simple change in leadership, it was the end of an entire political world. And what replaced it? Well, basically nothing. A massive power vacuum. The new Republic of China was incredibly weak, and it really struggled to control this huge, fragmented country.
A power vacuum never stays empty for long, right? And into this void stepped these ambitious, powerful military leaders who would go on to plunge China into a whole new period of intense division.
And this brings us to the warlord era. I want you to imagine a country that isn't really a country anymore. It's more like a patchwork quilt of territories, and each patch is controlled by its own military leader. These guys weren't just strong men. They ran their regions like personal kingdoms. They had their own taxes, their own money, and they were constantly fighting each other for more land and more resources. National unity, that was a distant dream. Personal power was everything.
Now, what's really fascinating when you look at this timeline is how quickly one crisis just bleeds right into the next. The fall of the dynasty leads directly into the warlord era, which then starts to overlap with the beginning of the Civil War. Even that so-called unification in 1928, it was shaky at best. It was just a relentless cycle of instability.
And the impact of all this fragmentation, it was absolutely devastating. With no real central government, China couldn't act like a unified country, couldn't defend its own borders, it couldn't come up with a coherent foreign policy, and it certainly couldn't stop foreign powers from meddling in its affairs. The country was fundamentally broken and completely vulnerable.
So, out of this national chaos, two major political forces start to emerge, and each of them had a radically different idea about how to put the pieces of China back together.
So on one side, you have the Kuomintang, the GMD, led by Chiang Kai-shek. Their main goal was to unify the country under a single nationalist government. On the other side, you've got the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, led by Mao Zedong. They wanted something much different, a total social and political revolution. And while the GMD was struggling with things like corruption, the CCP was gaining a lot of strength, setting the stage for an absolutely epic clash.
And this rivalry, well, it wasn't just a political debate. It exploded into a full-blown civil war that would literally tear the nation apart from the inside out.
From 1927 to 1937, China was at war with itself. 10 years. Just let that sink in for a minute. A full decade. Can you imagine the amount of resources, the number of lives, and just the sheer national energy that was poured into that internal fight?
And this slide really nails the true cost. All of China's attention was focused inward. The GMD and the CCP became obsessed with trying to destroy each other. And meanwhile, right on their doorstep, an expansionist Japan was watching very, very closely. This internal conflict was a massive distraction from a much, much bigger external threat.
Oh, and remember that unification back in 1928? Well, it was largely symbolic. Chiang Kai-shek's government had very little real power outside of the major cities. The countryside, a lot of the provinces, they were still run by local warlords or powerful elites who kind of paid lip service to the government, but at the end of the day, just did their own thing. The division was still very, very real.
And this brings us right back to our central question. China's chaos wasn't just an internal problem. It was basically an open invitation for an ambitious and increasingly militaristic Japan.
Japan's strategy was as simple as it was devastatingly effective. First, they just watched the chaos unfold. Then, they framed their own aggression as a mission to restore order. They calculated, correctly, that a divided China couldn't possibly mount a unified defense, and they gambled, also correctly, that the international community wouldn't really do anything effective to stop them.
And this, right here, is the absolute key takeaway.
China's political instability wasn't just some background noise during the Japanese invasion. It was both a cause, it gave Japan the excuse it needed, and it was a facilitator, making the actual invasion so much easier to carry out, both physically and politically.
You know, the historian Rana Mitter puts it perfectly. He says China's internal divisions were the critical weakness. They severely limited any chance of a strong, united resistance against Japan. It's just a powerful summary of how domestic problems can lead to international catastrophe.
So, this leaves us with a huge and really critical question. What if? What if China had been able to face this threat as a truly unified nation? If the warlords, the nationalists, and the communists had somehow managed to stand together, how might the history of the 20th century have been completely different? It's a powerful reminder of the immense cost of national disunity.